He started a major war with Chechnya, invaded Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014, and now we're on the cusp of another war with Ukraine. This is the playbook of a dictator. If you get unpopular, start a war. I'm Bill Browder. Some people describe me as Vladimir Putin's #1 foreign enemy. At one time, I was the largest foreign investor in Russia. My experience investing in Russia led to a bunch of horrible things, including being expelled from the country, declared a threat to national security, having my office raided by the police, having my lawyer who investigated it arrested, tortured, and killed back in 2009. His name was Sergei Magnitsky. I was responsible for a piece of legislation called the Magnitsky Act, which imposes asset freezes and visa sanctions on Russian human rights violators and kleptocrats. As Vladimir Putin is the largest human rights violator and kleptocrat in the country, he feels like his money is at risk, and so he's made it his personal mission to try to destroy me.
For the next 10 days, around 30,000 Russian troops will carry out joint drills right on Ukraine's northern border.
Vladimir Putin, over the last few months, has accumulated 125,000 soldiers on the Ukrainian border, on the Belarusian border next to Ukraine. The impression that he gives off from this massive mobilization of troops is that he's preparing for an invasion of Ukraine. The most fundamental thing is that this whole crisis can be stopped if Western governments group together and go after the money. And what I mean by that is go after Putin's money, which is held by oligarchs in the West. If we freeze that money, Putin will not invade Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. He became rich through his power being the president of Russia. And the crucial moment, the pivotal moment that it all came into being was in 2003, he arrested the richest oligarch in Russia, a man named McCaul. He put him on trial. He allowed the television cameras to come and film the richest man in Russia on trial, sitting in a cage. And when that image was displayed on televisions all over Russia and in the West, the other oligarchs came to him and said, "Vladimir, what do we have to do so we don't sit in a cage?" And Putin said, 50%. Not 50% for the Russian government, not 50% for the presidential administration of Russia, 50% for Vladimir Putin. And at that moment, Putin became the richest man in Russia and the richest man in the world. I estimate his wealth to be $200 billion, maybe more. That money is the crux of his whole presidency. That's what it's all about. So he doesn't keep that money in his own name. He keeps that money in the name of people he trusts. I call them oligarch trustees. Those people don't have an agreement with him. It's all based on a handshake. And unfortunately for Vladimir Putin, because it's not in any kind of formal agreement, if he was ever not to be in power and he were to call up one of his trustees, they may very well say, "I'm sorry, Vladimir who?" And so as a result, if for any reason he's not in power, he's no longer the richest man in the world. If he leaves power, he loses his money, he loses his freedom, and he might lose his life. Almost everybody who is a Russian government official, right up to Vladimir Putin, has chosen to be an official not because they want to serve their country, but because they want to get rich. That's the Achilles heel of the Putin regime. That's what these people care about, is their money and keeping it safe offshore.
When oligarchs go rogue, it's an unedifying spectacle.
Once a Russian official has stolen a lot of money, the first thing they look for is where can they keep that money where it would be safe, and where nobody would ask any questions. And over time, Russian oligarchs, Russian officials have all come to the conclusion that London is one of the best places to keep their money.
Lebedev, a former KGB spy, built a fortune by trading securities back in the 90s. His TV performance is unlikely to make the front pages of the Evening Standard and the independent newspapers in London. He bought them both several years ago.
Well, the main power that the Russian oligarchs have in London is cold, hard cash. Basically, they go around and find people that are ready to take their money, and once they have that money, they advocate very hard for their clients. People can generalize and say it's conspiracy theory, but I've seen it with my own eyes, I've seen it with documents, and I can prove it. People who are in the House of Lords are on the payroll of the Russians, ex-MPs, sometimes even current MPs. The former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, became a paid Putin propagandist. And there are many other leaders and former leaders that are in one way or another on Putin's payroll. He supplies 40% of all Germany's gas, 100% of Austria's gas, 100% of Italy's gas. And as a result, he has the potential, if he wants to use it, of turning off the lights and making Europe go cold in the winter. And that's huge leverage. Vladimir Putin is not a democratically elected leader. In his first election, he was elected president of Russia, but since then, he's done everything he could to bastardize the democracy to such an extent that there's no free competition for the presidency of Russia. What does he do? Anybody who competes with him to become president, anyone who becomes a popular opposition politician, is either executed, imprisoned, or exiled.
Gunned down in broad daylight, 4 bullets in the back, in the very shadow of the Kremlin.
The Russian opposition leader has suddenly fallen ill, and he knows exactly why.
You knew in that moment that you'd been poisoned.
Yes.
All the passengers can hear his agonized groans.
He has gotten rid of all non-state media. There's almost no oxygen for freedom of expression in Russia. So every newspaper, every television station tells his version of events, which are often not the true version of events. And then he does something much more pernicious than all of that. And if people are starting to become less enthusiastic about him, he starts wars.
A war that destroyed families and divided communities was driven not by people but by politics.
They just abused us. Russia is our neighbor, but it is also our enemy.
Now his popularity is flagging very dramatically because of COVID, and this war that he's threatening with Ukraine is a way of distracting the Russian people and shoring up his own domestic popularity. This is the playbook of a dictator. If you get unpopular, start a war. The international community can't seem to coalesce around a singular position. From Putin's standpoint, we are weak. We won't respond in a way that's going to be painful for him. And the only way we can stop him is to really create the type of sanctions, the personal sanctions, the sanctions against his money that will make him stop and think, does he really want to lose his money over this? The appropriate sanctions at this stage of the game would be to make a list of the top 50 Russian oligarchs who hold Putin's cash, and we know who they are, and to start, before he invades, with 5 of them, to announce that we're going to freeze the assets and ban the visas of the following 5 oligarchs who hold his money. And then announce that he has 10 days to retreat from the border of Ukraine. Otherwise, another 5 of those oligarchs will have their assets frozen. And if, God forbid, he actually invades, then all 50 of them will have their assets frozen, and we will draw up a list of another 50. I believe that Putin doesn't really have a strategy. He's a tactician, not a strategist. He's doing a calculation. He's saying the reward of invading, which is something that will give him a lot of domestic popularity, and he's weighing it up against the downside. The Ukrainians will fight, they'll fight like hell. This is a moment for leaders to stand up and act like leaders. If Putin is allowed to invade Ukraine, it's the equivalent of Putin taking Czechoslovakia at the beginning of the Second World War. There'll be a lot of blood, Russian blood and Ukrainian blood. For Britain, for the US, for Europe, this is an existential moment.